It's a high-tech conversation.
And a low-tech topic.
Live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.
It brings me great pleasure to invite Shane back to come and talk about his Bronte saw range. So, Shane, I think you're celebrating 10 years this year?
Yeah, we're coming up for 10 years of commercially making saws now to the public. I mean, obviously before that, we've done other things, but this is 10 years of actually people receiving saws, using saws, and then being out in the the woodworking community. So yeah, it is quite a milestone of doing it, because it is difficult to do. It's difficult to actually make a living making saws because they're so time consuming to make. I notice now there's quite an influx of saw makers that have appeared, since we've been doing it. People have looked and thought, yeah, actually, I'm going to have a go at doing that, which is often backed up by other means of income, whereas I'm just solely making saws, and that's the main source. That is our income. So yeah, 10 years of doing that has, it's certainly not been easy, but we're still doing it.
Great. So what have you got to show us this evening?
Yeah, so what I wanted to go through, a few things really. Firstly, about the business itself. That the business has had a facelift of a new website, a new Instagram account, and the way that it was that we were doing things before was a case of getting in contact and going on a waiting list, and then us getting back in contact with you, and backwards and forwards of trying to help you select a saw. So what we've tried to do is streamline that down. In all the saws that we offer now are on the website. There is a wood selection on the website, but not all the woods that we have. They're the woods that we have in bigger quantities. So there is on that drop-down menu, you can choose other wood, and then that wood can be chosen, personally, through email. And what it's to do is to record and log the saws from the customers, who the customers are, what specifically the type of saw they want, so that we can have the correct materials for making that run of saws, knowing where it's coming from. So it's just to streamline it in that way. So if people think, oh, this seems all very different, is it actually Skelton saws? Well, it is. It's just that we're now doing more of a letting the customer make the choice over our website, and then that order to come to us that we can then liaise if we need to at a later date. So that's the only real difference there. The new Instagram account that logs to the new website, and that started off as a fresh. But as far as how Skelton Saws is operating, it's exactly the same as it was before, but we just using different processes for recording people's requirements. The thing that we found is, over time, because we offer over 60 different saw combinations, it's getting, once you give the customer so much choice, it almost becomes so difficult to actually choose what you want. So we've tried to bring that down. We're still offering the same amount, but a more manageable, looking at exactly what you're after. And then when it comes to the point of making the saw, if there's a specific TPI someone wants, or specific woods that we might have in stock, then that can all be arranged at that time. But as far as saws go, obviously you'll have noticed, what I wanted to talk about today was, what separates our saws from any other saws that have been made in the past. What we've done that's more, revolutionary to saw making, and then also to introduce a new range of saws which are based on bringing a lot of different principles from other saws that we've made and combining those into a different line, which is what we call in the Bronte line of saws, where there's different design principles and the way the saw's constructed to give you a really optimized tool. And just to explain how that works and what the difference is with all the saws that we offer, so we do different ranges. So it's a talk over that, and also just the general saw construction that people are used to. If you go back sort of 60 years when you didn't have all the modern saw makers you have now, and there were mainly, saws that were coming out of Sheffield. So it's just to show where things have gone and where we've tried to take things. And ultimately, it's to just give someone a tool that is so precise, so accurate when you're using it, so smooth to use, and the lengths and breadths that I go to actually give you that when you actually pick the tool up and use it, and you think, oh gosh, yeah, this isn't like anything that I've used before. So it's just going over that. So what I'll start with is just basically the general saw design of how it was done, 250 years ago. So, if I take a saw like this one, so this is a Kenyan saw, which is, I would say, the most famous saw maker outside of London. It was an actual London maker that Kenyan poached to work for him, and that brought that London finesse of a nicely balanced saw to Sheffield, and then the might of Sheffield on steel and actually having the workforce then took a London-made saw with only 2 people making it to a more of a manufacturing, turning out so many more saws than what could be produced in London, which made them more affordable and more, so at that time they became the saw to have. But saw construction, as you can see, is you've got a traditional folded back. The price varied with whether it was a steel back or whether it was a brass back. This example is a steel back. Beech handle, and you can see you've got 2 split saw nut bolts. You can see those on the reverse side, quite fine. You've got this very, very, what looks like, if you look at that tongue, you would, as how that joins onto the cheek, you would go, my word, that is so thin, which it is. It's only about 4 millimeters thick in its finish point, but this saw's 250 years old, and there's no breaks in that. It's made a quarter sawn, like I say, it's quarter sawn beech, and you can see by the shape of the blade, it's the original blade, just how, when that's passed from cabinet maker to cabinet maker, it's been sought after. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been, used to this depth of plate. I mean, there's approximately about an inch depth of plate left on there. So again, very simple, very robust tool, very accurate. You've still got quite a level of detail with where your cheek, where you've got this bead on the top, where it's chamfered on the top of the cheek. There's still quite a lot of detail. And if I flick that on the underside, I don't know if you can make that out, you can see this tapering and how this tongue meets onto the cheek. So there's quite a lot of handwork that's gone into that to effectively produce a saw. So the downsides of this moving forward, and what we've looked at, is you have a marriage between the woodwork and the actual blade and the back. So the idea is when you tighten these bolts, you first tighten onto the back and then you tighten onto the blade. So what the disadvantages of that is, obviously you can see the way this one's made, you've got quite a bad fit between the actual back going into the woodwork. Although this is nice and tight still, you have got, again, the risk of obviously all timber moves, in different seasons, and you clamps onto the blade, which is the thing that you want tensioned. So that woodwork can be effectively a potential problem. You've also got a folded back, which you can see here, which means a lot of people get the misconception that a folded back is the blade, virtually tapped all the way in, and that's it. Whereas really the blade actually will only go in, maximum, a quarter of an inch into the back. And that's to allow you to, as you go in, actually tap at the back and tap at the toe to actually put some tension on. And the way that's working effectively, this back is like a vice coming in. So you clamped along the blade, and the idea is if you can tap the front end down more, then it'll bring the blade up and effectively pull some tension on the tooth line. The downside is they don't hold that well. So if you snag it, or if you're, if you cut in something that's really tough and you jerk into it and the teeth bite, you can effectively loosen the blade from the back. And what that does, it has then the opposite effect to the blade. So rather than the blade being tensioned, the back actually then pushes the opposite tension on, and you end up with the blade wanting to concertina. And then if you're then pushing that through a thin curve, that's when you buckle a blade. A lot of people think, well, you buckle a blade because you've been rough with a saw, but it tends to be just because the actual saw blade hasn't got much tension on. So moving on from that to what we did, which was effectively rebuild a 18th century saw using more of a gunsmithing approach, is where we then go on to, just excuse the tape on there, that's just to protect it while I'm finishing the handle. But this is one of our London long stroke 13 3/4 saws. This is our most popular saw that we make. The balance of the tool, it's just, it's just one of those things that you're thinking, gosh, they had it so right 250 years ago to what, the modern interpretations of saws have sort of gone on. They've sort of lost the way, become productionized, and then tried to then become more refined. But this tool is, when I first made it and had a go of it, I'm like, it's just in a different league. So it's a very light saw, tapered back, so the actual brass itself gets thinner as it goes down for the balance. But what I've done, as opposed to what you can see on that last one, is you've actually got a proper gunsmithed fit of the back into the handle. So you can see how this goes in. This is smoked into the woodwork, which means it's a process of me sooting the back, offering it into the wood, and removing the soot from the wood. So you end up with a fit that won't move in the woodwork. And it actually has a haunch joint into the back of the actual timber itself. And also you've got this fit on the underside. I don't know if you can pick that out where it fits in. So this again is still a marriage in the fact that when you tighten up the cheeks, the saw bolts, it then clamps on the back and clamps onto the blade. So you are fastened still onto the blade with this design. The difference being is the way the blade's tensioned. A lot of people say, folded back is superior to, say, a milled back or a riveted back, different constructions. But what I've done with this is there is still a friction fit. So it's still a tight fit between the actual back. Although this is not folded, this is actually, I actually slit this first prior, when I'm initially starting out, this back slit before it's formed. And then it's, effectively squashed. So you've effectively got what would appear like a folded back. The difference being is when you bring two bits of steel together, the chances of getting a good tight clamp all the way along the line is very minimal, because you've basically just folded two pieces of steel. It's like folding a piece of paper in half. Doing it this way, that slot that's in there is absolutely perfectly parallel. It's perfectly square. So the blade, when it goes in, is going to be perfectly straight when it goes in. It's not going to be, pushed to one side or pushed to the other when it's assembled. So I've taken that fit, but then made it better. The other thing that happens with this construction is the blade is actually pinned front and back with two bronze pins. And I have a jig that pulls the blade tight over the back with the back bent, and then it's released. And what that does is it gives you, straight away you can hear, if I just run my fingers down that, you can hear a ring to the blade straight away, which on a normal folded back you just don't get, because you can't apply that amount of tension. So that was our first improvement on what we've done. So effectively, with this saw, you're buying a saw like you would just buy from a London maker, and it's like going back in time. But the way it's fitted together is superior to what they could do with the machinery that they had at that time. So that's how that one works. So what we then did is we went on to make the Chippendale saw, which you can see on our website, which we've said, right, we're going to eliminate the woodwork from the actual blade. So the actual back of the Chippendale saw is actually cut all the way around the cheek, so there's no interference with the woodwork. So that means that if the wood moves, it's not going to affect the blade alignment at all. So in another 100 years, it would be exactly the same. And then what we've done with the new range, which is what I want to discuss today, is we've just gone that stage further. So you can see the way this saw's constructed. This is one of our Bronte dovetail saws. This one's in walnut. But you can see the actual brass back on here. I'm just hoping I'm holding the camera at the right angle for you. But it actually steps down. So it isn't just this height all the way through. It's actually cut. You can see it cut square around there. And then if I show it underneath, you can see how the back continues all the way along. So the actual saw bolts themselves that you can see there don't actually pass through the blade. The blade is free floating from even where the saw bolts are. So again, it's uniquely tensioned. You can probably just make out there, I don't know if you can on camera, a bronze pin through here, and then at the back there's another bronze pin. You can hear on that again the ring that you're getting from the blade. Really, I can pull so much more tension on this than I can any of the others effectively. Now the tension, people say, why do you go on so much about the tension that you're getting on the blade? And what I say to people, if you have a bandsaw and the blade's loose and you're pushing the wood through it, and then you tighten the blade up on the bandsaw and push the wood through it, it will sing and cut better when that blade's tight as opposed to when it's loose. And that's exactly the same as what these saws do. And that's why they sound so smooth when you're using them, because you've got this very high tension plate, which is not just tensioned along the tooth line, it's tensioned along the entire length. So you can see the force that I'm applying to that by how much my thumb's moving, and you can see the blade isn't moving. Now this is only a 15 thou plate, so really it should be, if I just give you an equivalent of what that's like, that's a 15 thou plate. So that's what they feel like with no tension on. You can see it's just like a floppy piece of paper. But by putting a tension on that we put on, you can see just how rigid that is now. Now, there's no one else doing it like this. It's a unique process that we use. The other advantage you've got of this design, and the reason it's shaped like it's shaped, you can see there's this curve coming down off the blade at the back, rather than it being straight cut down like this one. And that is, when I pull the tension on this and where it's pinned at the back, it means that it's all to do with the forces and the angles, but basically the tooth line is in front of where it's pinned. So you effectively haven't got a floppy bit at the back. This shape deliberately pulls the tension back onto where it's pinned to keep all of the tooth line in constant tension. So you haven't got effectively a bit at the back that doesn't have tension on. So you can't flop the back of the blade. The advantages of it, as the saw looks, effectively quite long. This one's 11.5 inches long. But what you have is, unlike this design, which is your traditional design, you can see you've got this cheek going round the underneath of the blade. Probably more exaggerated if I just pick up a dovetail saw, which is more equivalent. You can see there is not much blade underneath the cheek. Which means when you actually use the saw, once you get going, you're only actually using this section of the saw plate. Now, the saws I make, they're all long stroke saws, but you're effectively losing 2 inches of saw plate at the back of the blade. That isn't actually doing anything for you. You're only using what's in front. So you're taking an 11.25 inch saw, and you're effectively, using 9 inches of it maximum. Now, the way this one's working is I've deliberately kept the cheek down to a minimum. You can see there this height of how it's clamped onto the back. So when you're using the saw and you're sighting the saw, you actually can utilize the full length of the blade continuously until it bottoms out on here, which means that you've got a very nice, smooth, controlled stroke. It also means that I can put finer teeth on, so you're getting a very, very smooth cut, but you're not actually slowing down how fast the saw cuts down with each saw stroke. So effectively, you've got more teeth doing less work, so that's less sharpening to the saw. The other thing that you've got is you've got the ability, especially on a thin plate saw, for the saw plate to cool. When you're cutting woods like oak and that type of family of wood, you'd be amazed how much friction you get and how much heat builds up off them. Any heat to the saw plate, it's not going to detemper anything, but it's going to expand the steel to want the saw effectively to have less tension. So by doing what we've done, then that eliminates that as well. So and the detail that's in it, you can see the actual bead on the top, how all of this is formed. None of this is CNC cut. It's all done by hand. It's all cut from a plain board. The actual width of the board that I plane them down to determines the size of the handle for the hand that it's made. So it's it's completely bespoke to you. So in this family of saws, we've got this one, which is you're looking at, I think it's 42-degree angle on here, which means a lot of people think, well, what does that mean? And it's just how high the handle is and the angle which is coming down. So if I drew a line along where that radius is and that radius, that would be the angle at 42 degrees in relation to the tooth line. So that's the angle that you're looking at. So the optimum of a saw is getting the correct height. So you can see here where your main force is coming from, which is basically the top 2/3 of your hand. You're not really putting any force down here, using this section So if you look at where that radius is in relation to how high it is above the back, and also this angle forcing down onto the tooth line. So the idea is when you put your hand in a saw that's made correctly, it should, without thinking about it, is your pointing finger should point to the center of the blade, because that's, you know, when you're using the blade, it's the center that you're looking at when you're using the saw. So if you just take that 4 and then compare it to this one, so you can see the difference between the two saws is this has a much higher angle. So this is another one of the Bronte range of saws, but it's just down as high when you look on the website. So you can see that the handle's really kicked up on that one. And the reason being is this saw I've specifically done for draw fronts. We're using, you know, lap dovetails. And it's just so that you're not having to crouch down at the bench to use the tool. So when you pick that up, automatically the saw sits at a higher angle. You can still use it for cutting through dovetails, but it's specifically designed for draw fronts when you're at the bench. But you can see, even though this is much higher than this one, you can see that how much lower that is in relation. So your hand's sat much higher, which means it gives you actually more downforce onto the blade when you push the saw forward. But again, when you pick the tool up without thinking about it, your finger points again to the center of the blade. And that carries through to this saw here. So this is, again, this is the carcass saw that goes with this range. And you can see the angle is much lower, but the blade's much deeper. But again, when you pick the tool up without thinking about it, turn it over, your finger, but then, you know, will point to the center of the blade. The mistake that a lot of people do in more mass production, which is what I'm not about, is they'll use a dovetail saw handle and they'll put it on a carcass saw, which means then the geometry is wrong. When I talk about geometry, it's if the saw handle depth of blade length is optimized, when you push the saw forward, you know, when you first are taught to use a saw at college, they'll say, don't put any downward pressure on it, just push the saw forward. And people will still want to try and push down, especially if the blade's getting blunt. But the idea is that if you're at the right angle, the friction on the tooth pattern and how high your hand is when you're pushing the saw forward creates the correct downward force. So that's why you don't have to think about it using these tools. You literally just hold the saw and push it forward, and everything's done for you. Everything's taken into account, and that's why this design, all of our saws work with the same geometry, but what we've tried to do with this one is you know, completely eliminate any, you sort of future proofing it in the fact that if the handle moves, it doesn't affect the alignment. You've got a effectively, the handle's free floating, it's not doing anything. If for whatever reason or over years of sharpening, the blade can, you know, be removed, it can be replaced. So you know, it's really future proofing the tool. And then along those lines, what we've tried to do as well, just to keep things within the ranges matching. So a lot of people buy a lot of saws from us and they say, oh, I want them all to look the same. So these saws have fluted backs. I don't know if you can see that on this small camera, but they rather than a radius on the top and a chamfered underside, they're actually fluted, so you can see that's a concave cut that goes along there. And then if I show you this tool, so this is one of our gents saws that we do. Again, similar in the way that it's constructed. You can hear that high tension ring to the blade, pinned front and back. The way this one's constructed is you can actually see the back goes all the way down into the handle, and then it's screwed on the underside, but everything's clocked. So all your screws, the way I do this is the screw head's made oversized. It's tightened up. It's then marked, taken apart, turned down, slit, put back together. Then you can see the handle's tapered. It's actually then brought, so the actual screw, it has a chamfered head as it comes together. But what you end up with is, perfect symmetry of everything. And that's just going to my gunsmithing days. Everything had to, you couldn't have a screw that didn't line up with the barrels. Everything had to be straight. So I've just carried that across. Now, when I did get asked to make a gent saw, I actually spent a couple of years of not really wanting to make one because I like the picking up a pistol grip handle and it being the same every time you pick it up, whereas most gent saws have a turned handle, or like using a Japanese saw has a turned handle, and that means you can just pick it up anywhere. So you're not getting any muscle memory of using the tool because you've got so many different ways of picking it up and holding it and using it. So the idea behind this is this handle is based off a very early 18th century, about 1730 amputation saw, where you've got this hooked handle, and you can see it's octagonal, semi-symmetrical. You can see how it tapers as well. And what I've done is I've just really exaggerated. You can see round where all these chamfers go and where they meet and where they come off and back. So, everything's, very visually good. But what it means is when you pick the tool up, because it's octagonal, and when you do that with your hand, you can see how you have these flats. As you go around, you actually make that shape. When you hold it, you have got that muscle memory, so you can see where your fingers fold round the flats. Your little fingers fastened into the back, so every time you pick it up is exactly the same, but it's more nimble than using a pistol grip. You've got, it's much more nimble in the hand, and obviously I go very fine with the tooth pattern on that as well. But they've become really popular range to what we make, and we make a smaller one of that, which is this one here. So this is a little archer saw. Again, the only reason the tape's on there, so I've just put the first coat of our peacock oil on the handle. This one's, just show you the blade. Again, same construction. You can hear how much tension's on that plate. You can see that if I'm wagging it about and how much my thumb's moving, how rigid that is. Now that saw plate is actually only 12 thou thick. So that's now getting down, thinner than your finest Japanese saws. Very fine tooth pattern you can see on there, but it cuts extremely fast. It really is fast cutting. And I know people that are on here have this saw and they can sort of say, yeah, I've got one of them. It is fast cutting. And again, you've got, the fit where you've got this effectively like an arrowhead going into the handle, and you've got this cupid's bow that cuts into the black of the blade. But that's just your next size down from that tool, so you can see the size difference. This one's, we're making 3 different sizes. This is the middle size. And then have I just, sorry, swap these down. So the other thing, again, that you can have with this tool that we don't do all the time, we don't offer it all the time, but this is the same saw as what you've just seen there, but this one's made of bronze as opposed to brass. So bronze is an absolute nightmare to work, if I'm honest. It's terrible for, it's terrible on cutting tools, because it is not, the bronze that I use does not contain any lead. Most bronze people use has lead in it, which is why you get all the certificates with a tool saying it doesn't comply to a certain restriction. It's because it's leaded bronze. I use unleaded, just because, one, it's better for you, and it tarnishes different to leaded bronze. It's a slightly different colour. But again, the saw construction is just the same, but it's just to show that if someone says, oh, I really want it making a bronze to match a certain plane, I can do that. The other thing that you can see on here is this has been personalised. So this has the cabinet maker's trademark, which is actually in the saw bolt. I don't know if I'm close enough for you to be able to see that. And now that gets done by a gentleman that's amazing called Ian at Chalco Stamp and Dine. He actually hand cuts these. It's not like taking something to Timpson's and they just do it on a little CNC cutter. He actually chases that by hand. But it's just if someone wants something of a different level of detail, we can do that. The other thing is with all of these, you can see they're all on different woods, which we do offer on the website, but then I do source different woods that I think, gosh, that's a nice looking board, I'll have that, and then we'll offer that up. But it's just to say, when people look at saws and think, oh gosh, it's got a beech handle on, which you associate with classroom furniture, which sort of tarnishes the wood. You can see just how nice it can be. So that's a piece of Yorkshire beech from an estate near us. The beech that's on there, again, these have only had a couple of coats of our peacock oil up to now, so you're not getting that full reflective finish, but that's what we call on the website Wimbledon beech. So this is from a tree near it's actually on Wimbledon Common, which is why we give it that name. So you've got a lot of character going on in that wood. And then this wood, where people go, oh, I don't really know what that is, and they look at that with all its markings. Again, that is beech, not spalted beech. It's just where you've got the flame from the minerals and the soil going through it. So it can be really interesting. And then if I just show you this timber that I showed you earlier, which is, like I say, I'm not sure if my camera's picking. I might just put a light on just to see if that makes it any better. Might highlight it a bit more. Yeah, it probably does actually. But you can see this rippling effect going through it. So this is actually London gun grade walnut. So this is actually from, it is the top London gun maker in England. And these are the offcuts that are no good for making a forend or a stock from. Now, that piece of wood, believe it or not, has a stock blank. So we're talking a piece of wood which is around about 18 inches long, 2.5 inches wide, about 7 inches depth, is upwards from £4,500 they pay for that piece of wood. So this is an offcut from that grade, again finishing our peacock oil. This one's got an ebony collar on the front, but again, it's just to say we do get specials of different timbers in where they think, oh, what can I have that's out of the norm or something really special. We do offer things like that as well. So if that's all right with you, I'll wrap it up and just open it up for questions, because that's probably more interesting than me just carrying on talking about what the tools are.
Thank you very much, Shane. I think it's been a few years since we last heard you speak, and it was amazing to learn about the range. So yeah, we're going to open it up to questions. So if I think a few people have already jumped the gun, if you use the reactions button to raise your hand, we'll come to you in turn and ask you to unmute. So over to you, Jim, since you got your hand up first. There you go.
I did it. I managed it. I left the keyboard on the floor. All right, Shane, thank you very much. It was excellent. Yet again, it's always a pleasure to have you on Bench Talk. And it seems such a long while ago now. I've got one complaint. I had a complaint from somebody tonight about your saws. It was a musician friend of mine. He says, how can we play them now that you've tensioned them like that? Got you there, didn't I? Got you there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought I'd bring an old friend along. See, I mean, Wizzy's getting, Paul's got it. He got the joke. I can't bend the saw like that and play it anymore. But I thought I'd bring an old friend along. Recognize that one?
We can't see it, unfortunately. Oh, there we can now.
I'm trying. It's gone off. So hang on.
Is it? Have I got the same problem
it's
again?
Working now. Oh yeah. Yeah, I can see that now, Jim. Yeah, so that's the original Squire Peter saw that that I made. So that was a saw that Richard Arnold had, and that it is that one saw that the London long stroke patterns came from. So I got the saw was 11¼ inches long. It was actually short as the back of the blade was rotted away in the woodwork, but I did have a look. It was 11¼ inches long, and that's it's an exact copy of that saw. And from that saw, I then drew a saw smaller than it, the carcass saw, which is the 13¾ that I explained about, which is our most popular saw. And we also, I have so many more saws than what I've showed you tonight. But yeah, it was quite a big thing for us really to actually get hold of that saw from Richard Arnold, because that's really influenced the future designs of what we've done going forward. And I think Matthew from Workshop Heaven had left a comment on the Unplugged Woodworkers about if they only knew how right they'd got it back then, all those years ago, to how well it performed. But you only have to look at the furniture they were making back then, and you think, how could they even do that on the scale that they were doing it at? And it's because they had good tools. They really relied on the tools. So yeah, but yeah, it's a lovely saw, that, Jim. It's
yeah, I thought I'd bring it along because I'm probably only one of 25 people.
Yeah, we've only made 25 of those, and I do believe, when I've looked at the list, there is still a spare number that I thought I'd made them all, and I think there is still a spare number of that saw that I've missed. So that could be coming up in the pipeline.
It's in the cupboard somewhere, is it?
No,
I think this is going back almost to the.
Yeah, it's probably about 8 years ago. I think this is going back almost
to the beginning of your.
Yeah.
What? And it's still sharp as hell.
Yeah, and I know you use it.
I use it almost every time I use it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a remarkable saw.
It's beautiful. I brought it along as an example of longevity as well, because I do use it almost on every project, and I use it on boxwood as well, which is not a pretty soft wood either.
No.
And I almost use it exclusively on boxwood and ebony, woods that you would consider pretty hard woods. And it still doesn't need sharpening. It's still as tight as it was the day I got it, and it's still as beautiful as the day I got it. So if anybody wants to question about, is a saw worth the price of a bespoke saw of this nature, then you just look at the value over time, because quite frankly, this will probably be exactly the same when you do your next talk in how many years time will that be? 3 or 4 or 5 years? It'll be exactly the same.
The thing is, I always had it hammered into me from my parents and my grandparents, and it was always buy cheap, buy twice. That's all I ever said. You should always get the best you can afford at the time, even if you're stretching yourself, because you don't have to buy it again. Whereas if you buy cheap, it's just to get you through a patch where you then still have to spend more money on something of better quality. And that's the same ethos I use with the tools, is the fact that, the more money, but when you actually know what goes into the materials and how they're made and the effort of getting everything optimized for you, then, the amount of people that will come to a woodworking show and say to me, I don't understand why your saws are so expensive when I can go and buy one over there for whatever price. And I'll just say, well, just pick it up and have a go. And then they want to order one. They're like, oh, I've never used anything like this before. I can see where it's, and then they get into how they can choose things, and we measure the hand and it's made to fit, and it's a completely different way of doing it. And that's the difference between just buying something off the shelf and then having something personally made for you. And like I'll always say, we've got a long waiting list. People that pay for a saw then have to wait for it to be made. But you're actually buying something that I always say when I make a saw, I make them as if I'm making them for myself. I'm not making them to, hammer them out and make some money and move on to the next person. Every bit of detail it's a part of me in the tool. So you're effectively buying a part of me when you receive your saw. It's just a different experience. And that's why the likes of, Lee Nielsen, Tom, I know him really well. He'll come to our stand. Pre-COVID, he used to come every year. He'd pick every saw up, try every saw, and in front of this, he always pulls a big audience wherever he goes. He just say, I go to every show. I've been all over. He says, there's no one in the world making what you're making like this to this quality in saws. And he makes saws, but he knows we're no threat. Because we're only making 6 to 8 saws a month. We're not making hundreds of saws a month for a wider audience. It's more of a bespoke service.
Well, thanks for coming on tonight, and I'll give someone else a go. But excellent answers, and thanks very much, mate. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jim. Over to you, Paul.
Hi, Shane.
Hi there.
I was amazed when I actually saw the size of your workshop. I expected it to be sort of like at least a double garage, but it's a single garage. And
it's and the camera always makes it look bigger than what it really is.
Yeah, it looks like it's sort of like 40 foot long, and it's not. Yeah. It's a standard garage.
It's a standard garage.
The amount of machinery which is managed to fit into such small space is amazing. But great talk, fantastic saws, and I really do appreciate it when you use some of the heritage timbers which have been reclaimed. Yeah, you did some a while back. Was it St Paul's Cathedral?
Oh yeah, we made a saw where the actual timber was from the bell tower of St Paul's Cathedral. So you're going back to Christopher Wren, construction time. But again, now and again, we just get some bits of timber that do have quite a story that goes with them. But it's not something you can just come across at any time. It's just, now and again, you just fall on something. You think, oh yeah, that's going to be something else when that gets done. But all the woods that I use, I will say that although we do use, and have used rosewoods and ebonies, we do make sure that the woods actually aren't illegally logged. We know where they're coming from, or they're very old, old stock. I'm talking like 70 years plus stock that are in timber merchants, because all the new stuff, especially coming into England, is you can't pinpoint where it's coming from. So I don't touch it anymore. So I've gone more into woods with, like you can see with these different beeches and things that we've got on here, and boxwood is just There is so much character to be found in trees that have actually been left to grow and naturally come to their end of their life than things that are just plantation grown, where it's just completely boring. You haven't got tight ring growth, and the wood can move, over the side. So yeah, we do, obviously spend quite a bit of time selecting woods and trying to, get them from the right areas and know. We almost know the history of the tree and where it's been from what we're making. Like I showed you a piece of wood that's actually come from Castle Howard, which is, one of our biggest estates on the outside of between York and Harrogate, but a very big stately home. But one of the timber merchants that we use, he's got like first go on if a tree blows down, so he's got a sawmill who'll go and take it back and cut it up and season it naturally. It's not done in a kiln either. So I've got opportunity for things like that.
No. Well, thanks very much, Shane, as I say. And it was a pleasure to actually see the workshop. But as I said, I'm still astounded by what you can do in such a small space. And I think it's an inspiration to everybody. Just keep doing what you do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Over to Matthias.
Good evening. Thank you so much. This was absolutely fascinating. I'm afraid I only joined on the 5th ever, I think, bench talk, so I missed your previous one, and was most pleased to see what you were doing. 2 questions. The first one I hope is a fairly quick one. I had a look the other day at your new website, and I couldn't find. Are you still making the hand saws and panel saws you used to make?
Yeah, what that is with when I make it, there's two things to the question. When I first wanted to make panel saws, so this size, so this is a 26-inch, and I know there's a lot of people that have this saw. I do it right from 17, 20, 22, 24, 26-inch, which is based on the Kenyan Seaton saw, but in the full range of sizes. So yeah, we do make that saw still. It's not on the website yet because we've transferred all the popular saws that we make onto the new website. So people do have these on back order, and I will be making them. But what I've tried to do is I've ended to make a panel saw in this workshop. We've got to remember it's all made here. I don't buy anything in pre-done. Those blades are taper ground by hand in this workshop by me. So it's not done on a machine like everyone else does. So it's the same sort of method that we're doing, again, a few hundred years ago. But what that means when I do that is I have to bag all my machinery up that I use to be able to grind, because the grinding dust, it just gets everywhere and it sticks to everything, and it's bad for you. So I've tried to curb the amount that I make because of that reason. So what I'll do is I'll be making normal saws, and then I'll go, right, I'll have a run of panel saws, and then I can sort the workshop out for making those. But I haven't got the luxury at the minute of just opening the door into another workshop that's just for doing that grinding process. So I've at the minute, because I've got quite a few on order, I've restricted the amount that I'm making at the minute. That's the only reason.
So if one were interested in that and were to drop you an email, you could sort of put one on list.
We have a lot of panel saws on the list to be made. So it's not. I'm not saying I'm not making them, but I'm just saying that I've just tried to curb the amount that I am making, so that I can concentrate on other saws that I'm making. Because the thing is, I'm only one man as a maker. It's not. I'm not saying, "Oh, can you go in there and grind them down to someone else?" So it's just organising my time really. But they will be on, they will appear on the website, and there will be, available to order. And we do have, like I say, people that are on the waiting list for them to be made. I'm not saying I'm not making them. It's just that I'm probably not going to be making as many as I used to make.
Yeah.
So yeah. Sorry, what was your second question?
So the second question, you sort of preempted it because you spoke initially about the difference between the traditional classic folded back and your tensioned and pinned backs.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, because I mean, I got what you were saying, but how is there some sort of point, because the you could call it an advantage or a disadvantage, that the folded back, yes, it can slip and you can lose the tension and bad things can happen, but it at the same time it is sort of a safety device also. That is to say, if you detension your saw by sawing, you have a chance to put it back right again. Has it ever happened to saws with your kind of back that you reach such a catastrophic point that it just simply breaks?
No, I mean, I've you watch something will happen now, but in 10 years of making saws, I've never had one back.
No.
So that sort of answers that question.
Yes.
The other thing that people don't really realise with a folded back is to get this handle absolutely perfect on this back and onto the blade means that when I drill these holes through the saw plate, this handle is pre-drilled. So I make the handle, it's pre-drilled, it's then all offered up, and then I drill through where it's pre-drilled through the plate.
Yeah.
And the actual saw bolt, where it's not threaded, so it's only threaded for the nut, becomes a dowel fit.
Yeah.
So when you put that through, you're effectively putting a dowel through the wood and through the blade, which means without tightening it up, there is no movement. Now, what you've got to then look at is the fact that this brass is bottomed out in the woodwork.
Yeah.
You can see where that bottoms out, where again, it can't move, it can't flex. Now, if this blade is just offered into that folded back by, say 3/16, something like that.
Yeah.
Then how is the holes in the handle to relation of that back bottoming out on that blade to avoid movement going to be the same when it can move? Do you see what I mean?
I see what you mean.
That means that effectively, if the blade isn't as far in, then the actual back won't be bottomed out in the woodwork and it'll rock about.
Yeah.
So the way they get around it, people that mass produce folded backs, is the blade holes are bigger. So you've got waggle room, which means, oh no, I can't get away with 2 bolts, I'm going to have to put 3 in it, because you're then trying to use the wood as a vice as opposed to just being a dowel fit and offered up on it. So I hope that answers your question on,
it does,
you basically can't have as tight a fitting woodwork. You end up with, to show you that, you end up with this sort of fit in the back, where you've got that going on.
Yeah.
Now, if I tap the back, I can tighten that up, but it's only there to come loose again.
Yes.
And that's the difference. So you can see over time, that's what happens.
Yes.
Whereas with those over time, and like that saw Jimmy's just showed you, it's as tight now as it was the day he bought it. It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
So and the other thing, it's just evolution of something. So if you think all they could come up with at the time, because they couldn't mill that small,
no.
All that's happened is, it's a little bit like if it ain't bust, don't change it. It's that attitude. So
Yes.
they've thought, well, what I'll do is I'll fold a piece of steel in a press and lay it over the blade to stop the blade flapping about. And that's the difference between a panel saw and a back saw. And that's all they did. And all people have done is, well, that's how we always have done it. So we'll just carry on doing it that way. And what I'm saying is, what I've done is look at it and thought, I can make that better.
Yeah.
And that's what I've done.
Yeah. I quite see what you mean. Would your methods be liable to be usable in more of a, I would say mass production, but more of a more on a production line? Would someone be able to take your approach and turn out not 8 saws a month, but 500 saws a month?
What, using the same methods?
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose if you scaled it up to what I do, but you would lose.
I'm not saying it would be a beautiful thing, and I'm certainly not planning on doing it. I was just, I was wondering out loud, as it were.
Oh to me, making it. I mean, obviously, for a saw maker to buy a back in pre-folded, which is what 90% of anyone that makes a saw folded back, they're buying it in. I can only think of one maker that actually folds them themselves. You're just buying in a piece of third-party thing that's already been made by someone else. So effectively, if you provided a proper engineering workshop with the type of drawings and the levels that I go to, again, someone could make it, but the cost of having an engineer make a back would probably be running upwards, I would have said, £300 to £400 in machining costs, as opposed to a folding back probably costing you about a tenner.
Yeah.
So you're always going to go for one that costs you a tenner. So you could mass produce it up, but the saws would actually be more expensive than what I'm making them by hand at.
That's an interesting conundrum. Thank you so much for expanding on all that.
No, that's fine.
I've already taken up way too much of everybody's time, but thank you again for a most interesting talk and for your very kind responses to my questions.
No, that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Over to Phil.
Who's unmuted? Hi, Shane.
Hi there, you all right?
I'm all right. Good to hear you talk and to see so many of your saws. We all like those, we know. I'm getting towards the sharp end of your waiting list now, which is good. And everything I saw tonight and everything you've said has only increased my interest. So all good there. Looking forward to it. Interesting. It was actually partly Bench Talk that put me onto you to start with, just generally here in the community. I certainly was aware of the Squires saw that Richard had found, passed that across. And actually, it's your Bench Talk video before that I think gives the best description of how you've got your internal tensioning within, for instance, the Chippendale at that time.
Yeah.
It's all been good. There's no question coming. It's just general appreciation of what you do.
Oh, right. No, that's fine. Yeah.
No question. But I'm just pleased to see the new shape of the business and the things are moving on and things are looking pretty damn busy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like I say, it's, there's definitely been some changes in how we're moving forward. But but as far as the saw making goes, nothing's changed. We're actually got more. There's actually more going on. Than there was before in the lineup that we're doing. And also just trying to streamline, because the problem is you end up making the problem I fall in is someone will say, oh, can you make this at this length with this depth blade with this? And they've got an idea in mind, and I'll make the saw and I'll think, yeah, I really like that. It's nice. I might make a dovetail saw to go with that, or I might make a carcass saw or whatever. And then you end up with another line of saws and then another line. You know, the more that you do that, so what I've tried to do is streamline the saws down into, we no longer make the Sheffield style of saws that we made right at the start. We no longer make those. Saws that I haven't showed you today, we make, if anyone's got the book, The Tool Chest of Benjamin Seaton, we make every saw that's in that book 1-to-1. I haven't got those here, and there's only a snippet of them on the website, but they are actually listed on the website, although there ain't pictures for them all. So that's a range which is quite specialist for people that are into that sort of thing. So we do make every one of those. And then the London Longstroke range and the Bronte range. And then we do the specialist saws, which are like flush cut saws, curve starters, and then the gent saws. So it's just to try and streamline things down. The thing that people sort of maybe need to consider, you know, when they've got a saw made by myself, is I am actually making, like you can see here, the saws that I've showed you today, the saws that are going through the workshop. That's why they've got tape over the backs, so they don't get marks when I'm oiling them. So it just shows every single saw is different. So when I make, I'm not saying, oh, this month I'm going to make 8 of them, and I set up and I make 8 of those saws. I'll be making one of them, one of them, one of them, one of them, and then there might be all different size handles. So all handles, they're all individually cut out. They're all made of, you know, different woods, so they're not all cut from the same board. It's not like just getting a board in, right, I'm going to rattle and cut out so many handles out of this board. So it is very, it's a slow process, but it's very bespoke. And that's, you know, that's probably what the main difference is, that sort of separates us from most of the people.
Just one almost puts me out of one other thought I was having. Just when I saw you demonstrating the inner workings of the Chippendale saw, and just reading up on your background, you know, I don't know many people who have the mix of metalworking, gunsmithing, woodwork, cabinet making that you've had, and you can see that coming out in how the saws are made and designed. So even just, I want saws to use, but actually I want the saw with a mechanism you've designed because it's unique. So yeah, that, like I said, that first video I saw, I'd missed it. I wasn't joining this group then, but going back and looking at that, just seeing how it works, it was So
no, and that's, I have had quite a varied, like you say, which you've touched on there. I have had a varied, you know, background. So a lot of people think I'm just a saw maker and I'm just telling you what you think you need and you're buying into it. But really, you know, I did train as a gunsmith to start with, so that gave me metalwork and woodworking skills. I've worked in engineering, and you know, and trained as an engineer as well. And I've also worked as a professional cabinet maker for not only making new furniture but restoring Georgian furniture. So I have an understanding of construction, you know, how things are put together, you know, doing all different things from veneering to making locks and keys, and you know, the whole lot that went with it. But when you're working on, if you're working on new furniture, to save time, most of it's done by machine. But when you're restoring old furniture, it's done by hand. It's not machined. So if you get a chest of drawers and a drawer's missing, you can't set up machines to make a drawer. You make the drawer to match the other drawers that are in there by hand. And that's the difference. And I found, and I had good tools where I worked, but I had never picked a saw up that cut straight. That was out of the box. And I used to sharpen my own saws and other people's. And no one, I'm talking a cabinet making firm that I'd held for 25 time served cabinet makers. And some of them had been there, you know, more than 40 years. Not one of them could sharpen a saw. So, you know, so I,
rare skills.
and when I've, you know, and it's something where I thought, you know, even back then, I used to think, gosh, I could make a better saw than saws I'm using or other people are using. And that's probably what sown the seed later on for me then to think, right, I'm going to start making saws.
So get right. Here's the parting shot. Given the range of skills you needed, how about taking on an apprentice? Now,
yeah, I'd love to, but I get asked this all the time, but my workshop just isn't big enough for 2 people, and it's trying to up your volume and output enough, because I've worked in I've worked in manufacturing as well. Is you can safely say that if you take someone on, apart from little bits of jobs, they don't actually earn you any money till about after 6 months. So you've got that period of investing time in someone, and then trying to gauge if they've got the right sort of skills and mindset to take on what you're doing. And I'd imagine with what I do and how OCD I am about things, I reckon it'd be quite hard for people to work with me, if I'm honest.
I don't think we'd get the same saws out unless there was a particularly skilled individual who'd had a lot of years. But I know there's some employer apprentices here. It was just a bit of a hopeful future thing and partly a joke.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Best wishes for the future, and I'll step aside and let someone else.
All right, no worries.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Phil. Over to you, Nick.
Hi, Shane.
Hi.
Phil stole my question. I was going to ask if you wanted a 55-year-old apprentice from Northumberland. But I was also going to say about, your tensioning methods. Are you patenting these ideas?
No. I have explained them in the past to people, but I don't think people fully grasp it, and I don't show everything. But the problem is, and this is, if you put my name into Google and put, if you go onto Google Patents and put Shane Barry Skelton into Google, you'll see that I have patented another company. And if you do a patent, you have to write down absolutely everything that you do and how it works. You've got to provide drawings, and you've got to provide basically an essay of information of exactly how it works, and you actually patent the wording around how you do it. And that is why Dyson invented the bagless vacuum cleaner, but now you can buy a bagless vacuum cleaner from anyone, because they just word what they're doing differently to get around the drawings that are provided. So by providing a patent in the century we're in now is different to when you provided a patent 100 years ago. So so basically you're just broadcasting this is how you do it, and anyone can copy it. And you've got to remember those patent rules may apply to America and England, but you go further afield, they don't apply. So yeah, that's the reason I won't do it. Plus, to get a patent, you're talking about £14,000 for a patent, so it's a lot of money.
That could be an apprentice. And the other thing was, somebody was saying about heritage timber. Be great if you got a lump of the sycamore gap tree, wouldn't it?
I did see that come down, and I was.
It was dreadful, wasn't it?
You can't believe the mindset of some people, can you? But
I was thinking,
but that is what people are like.
Just thinking of good things that could come from the timber.
Yeah, no, I mean, all I know is the trust that's taken the timber away have said, obviously it's been cut up. I don't know how they're going to section it, and I don't know who they've got in mind. They'll probably have some famous sculptor in mind that might take bits of it, but I don't think it's something you can just go on to, go onto their site, say what you do, and be able to get a piece. I think it's going to be quite preserved, from what I can gather. But yeah, it'd be great. Like, but I don't know how I'd get hold of a piece. I think you've got to know the right people, haven't you?
I think so. Thanks very much for the talk. I really appreciate it.
No, that's fine. Yeah, it's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Charlie.
How you doing, Shane?
Are you all right?
Question for you. When you stamp your the hand saw plates and the panel saw plates, are you annealing the steel first, or are you stamping it, at the hardness, the final hardness it is when you
the final hardness?
You are.
Yeah.
Do you use the same fly press that you use to, for the rest of your stamps?
Yeah, I can turn the camera around and show you the fly press.
So you must whatever you're using underneath the saw must be
so that's the fly press. That's the fly press that I use.
Yeah.
Which is if I just bring it round here, you can see it's a number 4, which is 4 ton.
Wow.
So that's I can apply 4 tons of pressure. The steel is between 50-52 RC hardness, and it takes approximately 3 blows of the fly press to actually put that into the steel. You can't. Well, I'm saying you can't. You can anneal spring steel and retemper it, but it will move.
Right.
So it's the other again. I'll just show you. So that's the stamp that I use for stamping the panel saw blades.
Oh, okay.
But obviously the steel that it's made from is not your normal tool steel. It's a very specialist steel, and it's quite a hard process of heat treating it as well. It's not just a case of heating it up and dipping it in in oil. It's done. It's done under. It's quite a but you end up with a tool that's extremely, the RC hardness of that is really high, but not high where it's brittle. But I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, most people now, if they want to put a mark on the blade, will just laser it. That's what most people do now. But if you go back, obviously there were stamps, and then by using the fly press to stamp rather than just having a stamp where you blow with a hammer, where you're like, flipping heck, it's just slightly off, or it's a bit too deep, or it's deeper at one side than it is at the other.
Precision.
You can see by doing it in the fly press, I can adjust, one where this sits in. I have a special jig for all the different backs, so I can stamp them right in the middle.
Right.
I mark them where the centers are. Everything's lined up first on blank steel before a saw back goes in, but it means everything's perfect. So you can see like the stamps are, perfect for the positioning and depth. And again, that was recommended by Ian when I first started. He says, if you're going to buy anything for stamping, get yourself a fly press, because you'll have a right job doing it by hand.
No, I agree. Precision is the big difference between, using a hammer and trying to figure out some way to hold your stamp versus, using a press of some sort. I use a press for mine. I don't have a fly press. I mean, that would be great. But my other question was, now I'm going to forget. I've been thinking about it this whole time. So your backs are milled. You mill your backs, and then you're milling the slot the same width as the plate thickness, and then you're using just your pin and your tensioning system is what holds it in place. You're not actually, your friction fit is you're not forcing the metal into like a smaller opening.
No, it's actually the opposite. The actual the width that I put in is
Yeah,
no,
no,
I know what your question was, so it's fine.
yeah, I was just gonna say I do appreciate how much time goes into all the little individual facets, of making a saw that you talk about. People, think it's simply about putting stuff together, but there's a lot of time spent, milling blanks and, and individual pieces of wood, and all that takes, a lot of time to make saws in the way that you make saws. And that's it's a lot of people say they make things by hand, but to truly do everything, like that is a whole different animal, I feel like, than what a lot of people realize. There's a lot that goes into it. A lot of time that's spent not actually putting together a saw.
Yeah. To get back at your question on how I do the slot, well,
yeah,
the actual width of the slot is actually slightly wider than the blade. I'm only talking, if your blade's 0.4, which it would be on a 15 thou, then the slot would be 0.41 bigger. Okay. So but then the blade is then the actual saw back is then swaged, so it actually, you end up with that tapered vice-like fit on the actual back itself. So the blade doesn't just sit in; it has to be knocked in. So it's right. So yeah, you're effectively getting the benefits you would from a folded back, but a much higher resistance to the actual blade itself than what you do when you just bring two bits of folded steel together. So it's, and just to get back to hand, if I just take the tape off this saw so you can see it. When people say, "Oh, the backs that you make the mill," if I just show you this, so this particular saw here, this is the 13 3/4. This has a tapered back, and then you can see the detail. If I just show you the front, it's chamfered on the underneath. You've got then this spear shaped back as it goes into the handle. You can see where you've got your radiuses. This, you've got this round radius at the top, which then terminates into a flat. That is not machined. That's all hand filed. So it's not that, I put a cutter down that and put the radiuses on and the chamfers on. That's actually, done by hand. It's all hand cut, and that's the difference. Then, and a lot of people, might leave that square, or not go to that sort of level. So yeah, but that's more of that. The difference, the difference of getting that true hand finished piece rather than, say, something that's just machined and assembled.
Right. I mean, when I said milled, I was, speaking under the assumption that people would know I'm just talking about the slot.
Yeah, the slot.
Not the details on the back. I understand that's all hand filed. I mean, that's it's, it comes through in the work. There's a different look to things that are strictly machined versus, things that are, at least in my opinion, that are done by hand.
Oh yeah.
I think that's everything I've got.
Okay. Nice to speak to you.
Nice to speak to you as well.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Simon.
Right. Hi, Jane. Nice to meet you. I mean, first up, just like to compliment you generally. I mean, I've looked at your website over the years, sort of, and so admired the work, the standard of your work, etc. However, saying that, everyone in this group will tell you I'm the old skeptic in terms of I make furniture for a living, and clearly every tool I look at buying, I look at sort of price over what it gives me. But I have to say, before I pose a very, very simple little question to you, I have to say that I was slightly skeptical about the theory of you getting this extra tension into the blade. that I have become a convert with your explanation tonight.
All right, no, that's fine. Yeah, no, I mean, it's trying to explain it in, you know, in a manner where, you know, I'm visually showing you the difference, and that's the problem. The problem that I have is by having a website and doing things mail order and not having a shop. The only opportunity people have is if I do a show, or one of my saws is with someone where they go, where the, you know, there's a lot of places in England that where people have my saws, and, you know, apprentices can go and they can have a go with one, and then they see what it's about. So it is hard when you look online and you think, gosh, they're hundreds of pounds more than other people, so I don't know where all that money is. And then he says, oh, it's got this high tension, you know, but it's sort of the visual demonstrations and having a go and just trying to explain that, you know, which I tend to use, is that bandsaw theory of, you know, the minute you get a bit more tension on, it just sings differently when it's cutting through the wood, and that's what people find when they use the saws. And you just can't get,
there's a certain noise when
tension on.
Going correctly.
Yeah.
Okay. So having originally planned to ask you this skeptical question about if I gave you somebody else's saw, the fact you were a better saw sharpener than most people, how close would that saw be to yours? I'll scrap that completely.
Yeah, do you know, we have so many people that come to me and say, I've got this saw, can you make it work? And then they think they're buying a Skelton, they think they're getting a Skelton saw when they've got it. And I'm explaining to them, look, I just, you know, you're almost throwing good money after bad. That ain't going to happen, you know. So I tend now, I don't actually sharpen anyone else's saws. I used to sharpen.
I wasn't trying to propose you as a sharpener.
Yeah,
it was merely
I just don't do it anymore. You know, there's the odd person that I know that might say, I've come across this saw, I really like it. Can you make it work, or can you put a new blade in it? I mean, I've even had saws where the woodwork doesn't clamp the blade properly on it being an old nice saw, and I've actually cut out all the fit of where the woodwork is and let new pieces of timber in and refitted everything back by hand and offering everything up to actually make it work properly, like how I would make it. But that's rare that I'll do something like that, and I'd consider that more restoration than I would, you know, just someone dropping me a saw off to sharpen. So the thing is as well is when everything's straight and true, you can get away with a very, very minimal set, and you want the saw.
That was going to be my actual question. So I'll pose my question.
All right.
So we'll take a dovetail saw as the example, but you can perhaps explain how you make the decision about where you go with perhaps a saw that was doing slightly heavier work.
Yeah.
So what is the kerf on your dovetail saw over plate size?
So on a 15 thou plate, you'll be making a 21 thou cut. Right. We put on the website, it's between 0.02 set per side, which gives you that figure. Now it does vary on the tooth pattern. So if you go for a finer tooth pattern, I can get away with less set because you've got more teeth removing the fibres. When you go more aggressive, you sometimes need more set on because that tooth is passing through and effectively the wood's closing behind it as it goes. So But when you've got a lot of teeth close together, you can get away with a finer set. Now the reason you have an optimum amount of set is because your different timbers, the fibers are cut differently. So if you take something like say even beech, when you cut the fibers on beech, yeah, the wood can spring and it can close on your, depending what the grain's like, it can close on your blade and give you resistance. But if you cut beech and then you cut, say, oak pretty much when you cut that and the way the fibers tear, it leaves you an actual more open cut than it would if you were cutting beech. So some woods, the fibers sort of tear out and cut nice and even, and then some woods, the fibers don't cut as well, and they actually, they're more hair-like, and they give friction on the blade. So if you go too fine with the set, it might work in your really hard woods like oak, and then you come onto something else and you think, gosh, that's all sticking. But the same way, if you put more set on, then you're into, a saw will cut the less amount. It's like using a chisel. If you pick up a 1/4-inch chisel and take a cut out of a piece of wood, you can cut quite deep. But if you get an inch chisel, you can't pare that unless you use a mallet. And that is because you're removing so much more wood with the same resistance. You need more resistance behind it. So if you put more set on and you create more curve, you're removing more wood, which is more resistance. So that's why, like I showed you, that very fine saw with only a 12-thou plate, that saw cuts just as fast as, say, a 20-thou plate, but still with a fine tooth pattern, but you're removing far more fibers. So it's slicing more than, obviously, the more curve width you put on, you're removing more fibers. But what I was going to say earlier is, because, especially like the Bronte range that we do, because the blade is completely free floating from the wood, it means that blade is absolutely perfectly straight, both down its length and its height as well. So because of that, I can get away with so much less set, because everything that plate as it goes through is absolutely perfect. Whereas on an old saw, that plate and how it's nipped into the handle, you get little ripples. So you need more set to compensate for that blade not being absolutely mirror flat. And so that plays into it as well. The other thing I always recommend is to put some wax. We make peacock wax, which actually stays on. It's not like rubbing beeswax on where it rubs off and clogs up. So I always recommend, putting some wax on the sides of the plate, because then that eliminates the friction. It glides so much better than just a bare plate. And the other thing you've got to remember as well is some woods hold moisture, so that's to be taken into consideration with a set as well.
Yeah. So you're so before I just hand back to let somebody else. The other thing that interests me is obviously, with a rip cut, a rip cut's a rip cut's a rip cut. Have you, with your crosscut, have you sort of stayed very much with tradition, or have you looked to experiment or develop other ideas with the way you cut your crosscut saws?
Well, the thing is, you've got with any saw, you've got the rake angle, and then you've got the fleam angle.
Yeah.
So the more fleam you put on, the more of a point, the more of a V point you put on the tip of the blade. If you put too much fleam on, then you actually end up, when you're filing, when you go finer on the teeth, removing the opposite side blade and misshaping it. So that's why when you sometimes see crosscut saws that are old, they're very big tooth, little tooth when you look down the saw plate. So the other thing is, crosscuts originally were invented for sawing timber that won't actually dry. So you're slicing the fibers as opposed to chewing them out, creating tear out. And that's why you get your hand saw, your traditional hand saw and a panel saw. When you look at them, you're like, well, it's just an hand saw in it, but it isn't, because your hand saw was a rip saw and your panel saw was a crosscut saw. And obviously, if you have a very fine rip saw, so say you've got your dovetail saw and you put that up against, say, your tenon or a carcass saw that's crosscut, you'll have less tear out from your dovetail saw than you do out of a proper crosscut saw. So the saws that I make are fine in cut but fast cutting. So I can get away with finer teeth, leaving you a finer finish on your joint. But the one thing with messing around with teeth, and obviously I do crosscut saws, you can have a saw in crosscut and that's absolutely fine. But I find that a rip saw is far more universal than a crosscut saw, because I find, that's why when you look at our carcass saws, you can have them all filed 3 different ways. So you can either have a standard rip, a fine rip, or a crosscut. And if someone says, "Oh, I just want one saw from you that I can do everything with," and I'll say, "Well, get a carcass saw in fine rip," and that's because that fine rip is fine enough to still cut dovetails, and it's deep enough blade to still be able to cut tenons. But you've got to think 90% of every joint you make is cutting down the grain. So you're only slowing yourself down with a crosscut saw. And if you aren't causing tear out, then obviously a rip saw cuts faster. The other thing that I always explain to people is, when you're using a crosscut saw, you're effectively you're balancing the saw on 2 points, cutting down fibers, which means that if you've got hard and soft wood like oak, the saw will always want to go down the soft route cut. So you can end up with crosscut saws wanting to wander more than a rip saw. So you've got to remember, a rip saw is completely flat across the bottom. So you've got chisel teeth, removing the fibers really even. So a rip saw, I mean, my crosscut saws, cut just as well, but just when you're fine tuning, you will always get a rip saw to produce an absolutely perfectly straight cut, and know that as that saw bluntens, it will still maintain that perfectly straight cut. Whereas a crosscut saw, that once that starts to blunten, or you hit a bit of harder wood, and you've got to remember those teeth tips are much finer, they're much thinner, they're coming to a point. If you start rounding those off, then the teeth on the other side are going to take more of a chunk of wood, and then you end up with a saw wanting to wander when they start to go blunt. Whereas a rip saw, you don't get that as much, and that's why I always promote those more. Plus, I can teach someone quite easily how to sharpen a rip saw by setting up wooden jigs. It's so much harder to teach someone how to sharpen a crosscut saw. So to maintain your own saws, I'll say you're always better off going finer with your rip saw than you are having a crosscut saw that you can't sharpen yourself. So that's another reason as well.
Well, that's a brilliant explanation. I may well expand on the question slightly in an email to you at some point.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine.
Coupled with a check. All right.
Thank you very much. Say that just to point out to people that the ordering system that we have now,
I saw the thing.
It secures your place in the queue, and the £25 you pay obviously comes off the price of the saw when you pay the full amount. So it's not like it's £25 to get on the list and then you pay for the saw. It's, that price is deducted off your saw. But any questions, feel free. If you're umming and ahhing between different models, then that's not a problem.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, Shane.
No, that's fine.
That's back over, and again, as I said, the standard of the work is just outstanding. So well done to you, sir.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. On to Chris, who I believe is the last question. So,
hi, Shane. Nice, love your work. This is actually kind of a silly question. When you're putting a saw together, like, do you put the blade on and then sharpen?
Yeah.
Or do you sharpen first?
No. What the method of when I get to the final assembly. So I've actually done. There's a few videos on the Instagram that we've been doing where I've had saw backs laid out and blades ready to go in the backs. Then the blades are assembled. Then there's straightening processes to do when you bring two bits of material together under tension. They've got to be straightened. So you go through that process. Then you go through, depending on how the saw's constructed. If it's like the London range, then the blade's offered up to the handle. It's drilled, then it's removed. And then where obviously where it's been drilled, it's all deburred, and then the blades, I do the blades to a satin finish. Then I go through this rigmarole of lining up all the bolts and making sure that all the like you can see on these, like all the split nuts, all line up perfectly with the saw back, and then these are then turned down and they're all flushed with the timber. So they're not countersunk; they're actually flush with the wood. Because this is how they used to do it back then. They were all flushed off. Then I will do the sharpening at that stage. So the saw's all assembled. It's effectively then it's ready to start sharpening the teeth. So the teeth I cut one by one on the fly press using basically a notching tool like this, which is I've custom made. So you can see how that notches. I don't know if you can catch that on camera, where you've got like you've got a triangle going into a block that fastens into the fly press. So I notch every tooth, and that gives you a rough form of the tooth. But then I'll file each tooth, which then forms the tooth. Then I'll set each tooth, so one way, one the other way. And then when I've set it, then I will then file each tooth again. And then I go through the process of how I uniquely do get the set correct on every tooth, which other people don't do, but it's just the degree I go to. And then the saws are then test cut. And then, make it, if there's any final tuning to do, then that's done at that stage. So it's quite a lengthy process. But the thing that people miss with the setting and things like that is because the tooth, try and explain it, because your tooth's effectively a triangle, but you've got this rake angle at the front. So the tooth is effectively more this shape because that rake angle is steeper than the angle coming off the back, which means that you have far more material behind the front of the tooth where the point is. So when you actually push that tooth over, it does, if it was a perfect triangle and it had equal amounts of material either side, it would just fold over like that. But because you've got one side steeper and the other side, that one side steep, so you've got more material behind the tooth. When you push that tooth over, rather than it go like that, it effectively goes like that as it goes round, because it's bending more behind it than it is in front of it. So that means that the front of that tooth that originally was filed straight across is now, when you look at the top, at a different, it's just off being square. So that's why you then do a refile after you've done your set. And that's the bit that a lot of people sort of miss, and that's why you don't get the saw cutting perfectly. But yeah, so yeah, to answer your question there, the processes of, from assembly to then sharpening, that I do. I hope that explains it. If not,
yeah, it does. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
I was just curious of how you go about sharpening, basically.
Yeah.
Putting a tooth line in. The fly press is a pretty cool idea, because I actually thought you'd file them in.
Oh no, I mean obviously the fly press, I can rotate the tool to create any rake angle, and then I have, there's a fence and a jig where I can set up and cut any TPI to the correct depth, and what that does, it gives you a notch that's absolutely perfect and uniform, but it's not sharp at the top. You've got to then file them in, and I don't use any. I have no filing machines. It is all done by hand. But I use needle files, Swiss needle files. I don't use what effectively normal saw files, because they're too coarse when you get down to the thinner plates and the finer teeth. So I use a jeweler's file, on the finer saws, as opposed to what I'd use, when you're getting up to 10 and panel saw size.
Yeah. If I wouldn't mind, if you might be able to send me a link for those files, if possible.
You can get them through. The files that I use are no secret. They are. You have to. There is different qualities of files that you can buy, and I use genuine Swiss jewelers files. So they are the same files that jewelry makers, watchmakers, clockmakers use. So you get and you can only really find them at proper outlets that are for that industry. You can't go onto your normal spots and find them. But if you Google them, if you just Google Swiss jewelers files, you'll see, that the people do sell them, as opposed to just a normal needle file.
Oh, perfect. Thanks. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you very much, Chris. Shane, have we got time for one more question?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah. Andy. Mr. Brown.
You all right? You got me?
Are you there? You all right?
Hi up, Shane. Have you ever considered the brass and wood back? I can't see myself.
The what? Sorry.
The brass and wood back.
No.
I picked this saw up out of a workshop. I've obviously made it himself.
Yeah.
It's all, I think this is all one piece of timber. And he capped it off with a piece of brass. He even went to a nice little dovetail detail in there.
Yeah.
But just never seen that before in my life.
No, I have seen saws with wooden backs that people have made. Not seen anything like that. But obviously it all has served a purpose at the time he made it, and he probably great pride in tool when he was using it. But obviously the problem with wood is it moves.
Oh yes. I mean, this
is whereas steel will expand, but it tends to expand quite evenly, a bit like train lines expand. But they expand fairly consistently over the length, whereas a piece of timber can do anything. It can move about. But yeah, it's an interesting tool. But no, I'd never I'd never do anything like that. No.
It's the two brass screws that hold the back on that's the the key to the old job. Anyway, Shane, brilliant talk, mate. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you very much, Andy. Going to jump back to gallery view, and I think this is the time that we raise a toast to the bench and say thank you to Shane. Thank you very much, Shane. Thanks for a brilliant talk.
No worries.
Cheers, all.
Shane and the bench.
Thank you.
Cheers. Very interesting evening.
Cheers, Shane. And the bench.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. And thanks to your daughters as well.
Oh, yeah. Without them, this wouldn't have happened.